Good day, you beautiful people of YouTube. It's the Mad Marine, and today we're going to do an interesting video today. I did a video back in 2020 about what you should buy, whether it was an AK or an AR at the time, and well, it's 2022, May of 2022, and we're going to talk about, hey, is that still true? Which one should you buy, an AR or an AK in 2022 at this point? And we're gonna figure out basically which one we should buy. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and tell you, spoil the outcome in here. I think you should buy an AR-15 over an AK in 2022. Now, there are some exceptions to some rules here, and we'll talk about that here as we go along. But I want to give the reasons and exceptions. But if you could, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. That does help the channel grow, and I greatly appreciate it. So first, let's talk about cost, right? So AK, AR, or I'm sorry, yeah, AK, AR, we're going to talk about the cost. So a basic AR-15 these days, what in the world would it cost? Now, honestly, you can get some pretty cheap kits when buy a cheap receiver for like $50 and the kit for about $450, maybe even $350 sometimes if you're lucky enough. So you could be in a rifle, an AR-15 for $500. Pretty economical. What about AKs? Well, most AKs like a Wasser 10 or an older Yugo are about $800 to $1,000 depending where you're at. So definitely almost double the money in some cases. Now you can pick up those PSA rifles for about $700. That's not an endorsement, but hey, you could do it. So that's one thing. So as far as the cost and availability, or as far as the cost, the AR-15 wins in that. So point for the AR-15, one for the AR-15. Moving over to ammo, 7.62 by 39 for AKs. It's the standard caliber for the 47. Is currently at 35 cents per round. Now, if we jump over to the AR platform for new production brass, 5.56 or 2.23, is actually 42 to 46 cents a round, which you'd say, mad. 46 or 47 is greater than 35. We should buy the AK, right? Well, there's some issues with that. One is I don't know how long 7.62 by 39 will be cheaper than 5.56 or 2.23. And with the way things are going in the world, I think it's risky. I think it's very risky to have the expectation that 7.62 by 39 will be cheaper than 5.56 or 2.23. I don't think you can sit back and say, like, this is a known that will always be. I think it's too risky. We'll go into some other aspects of ammo, but as far as right now, 7.62 by 39 is cheaper than 5.56, but I do think it's a very risky venture, and we'll go into that a little bit more. So one of the things is production. Where is the ammo produced? 7.62 by 39, there ain't much produced here in the U.S., and none of it is steel. All of it is brass that is produced in the U.S., which is very expensive. And ammo manufacturers are not producing brass 7.62 by 39 very much at all. They're producing 5.56, 9mm, and all the other calibers. It's more important to them at the moment. So production, where it's produced, where it's coming from. This is coming from Europe. If it's coming from Europe, what's going on right now? The Ukrainian crisis. That stuff is just being poured into militaries, whether it's the Ukrainian military or other militaries within Europe that are saying, hey, we need to start stocking up for whatever reason. So in that scenario, don't expect as much ammo making it to the U.S. It's needed elsewhere. So that's one of the issues with the ammo. Talking about magazines. So, hey, mags are mags, right? For the most part. As far as cost, you can get an AR mag, a cheap AR mag, and a cheap AK mag for about the same money. The downside of that, if you wanted to, and let me see if I can find one real quick. If you wanted a nicer surplus magazine, like a good old Circle 10 AK waffle mag, these are kind of pricey right now. You want a Bakelite? Forget it. Those are $100. These are like $50. Surplus AK mags are really expensive. Surplus AR mags are $5, so pretty easy on that one. Hey, the AR wins in the magazine department, but for your basic entry-level mag, new production, they're about the same. So something to consider. Yeah, then moving into the politics. Um, yeah, so real easy. We're talking about AKs. ARs are existed in here in America to restrict, ideally, to restrict ARs would require passing of laws by either your local state government or your federal government, which could take some time. Whereas AKs, a stroke of the pen from any U.S. president could do this in. There'd be no more parts kits, no more ammos, no more anything, like nothing. It would just be done. The end, game over, stroke of a pen, executive order, this is done. And this goes from like $1,000 AR to $3,000 AR, or I'm sorry, $3,000 or $1,000 AK to a $3,000 AK overnight. It would just be the worst thing ever to happen within the gun industry. So ARs are produced domestically, which means these are just going to be readily available, and the politics isn't as big a factor. It is a factor, but it's not as big a factor. So AKs could easily go away. Some of the ammunition parts and everything else. Modularity. Let's be honest. The AR wins on this. It's so easy to upgrade an AR. When people say, "Oh, I built an AR," you really didn't build it. You just assembled it. When people say, "I built an AK," they built the AK, I promise you. Bending flat receivers, riveting, dremeling, hammering, filing. It's misery and beauty at the same time. So you truly build an AK. But anyway, modularity, the AR wins. It's just so much easier to do. It's much cheaper to do as well. There's just so many parts available. AKs, can you accessorize it and make it the way you want it? Absolutely, but it's going to cost you more and it's a little more difficult. If you have a fixed stock version and a side rail, it's going to be a little easier, like a Wasser 10 would have. It's going to be a little easier to make it more module. But if you have a Yugo, it gets a little more difficult. And if you got an underfolder, it even makes it more difficult. So modularity, the AK does not win out, but it can be done, but it's going to cost you more. It's going to be a little bit more difficult. So modularity, AR wins. Parts, overall parts, AR wins. There's just so many opportunities. The other thing with AK parts, they're through the roof. Now I have a good old Romanian trunnion. And this Romanian trunnion, believe it or not, is a Romanian G trunnion. If I told you that this one part used to be, I don't know, you might be able to get one for 25, 50 bucks back in the day. You want to take a guess at what this one part is right now? Well, there's one on Gunbroker. It's the cheapest one I could find, and it was $77 for bidding. Now, the buy now options are actually about $150 to $170. That's insane. That makes me think my Wasser 10 is worth more if I chop it up into parts than if I were to sell it as a whole rifle. Like, AK parts are through the roof. AK wood furniture is gone and non-existent. I saw people selling Bulgarian 74 sets of wood furniture for $200. They used to not be able to give them away at like $59. It's nuts. It's nuts. Absolutely insane for wood furniture and parts for AKs. ARs, you can buy just about anything you want. It's all in stock. Flight prices might be slightly still a little higher than normal, but not bad. It's not hurting you that bad in most cases. High-end AKs versus high-end ARs. High-end AKs are insane. Like, if you want a Sega rifle that's been converted, just go ahead and say like it's $2,000, $2,500 start point. A high-end AR is basically back to 2019 price point, so whichever one you may want, like a Daniel Defense, it may be back to like $1,000 or $1,300, where the high-end AKs, they're floating at like $2,000 or more. And variants like RPKs or RPKs or PSLs or any of that stuff, forget it. It's $2,000, $3,000 easy. So the high end stuff, it's way too much money. Peak pricing, AKs. The basic AK usually hits about $1,000 to $1,200. Basic AR usually hits about $800 to $1,000. So just kind of another weird thing with AKs and ARs. Now, right now, again, if you wanted to buy an AK, price point wise, it's not a terrible time to buy it, especially an entry level one. But if you wanted a premium one, I don't recommend it. It's insane. But if you wanted like a good old Wasser 10 or an underfolder Yugo that you could find, $800 to $1,000, maybe it's for you. But the other thing is you could buy 2 ARs for that money. So that's kind of hard to justify a little bit, in my opinion. Pistols, whether it's the AK or the AR, I would tell you don't buy a pistol. It's a terrible idea right now. The ATF, everyone knows, does not like the idea of pistol braces. That will probably, they'll probably going after that soon. So I don't encourage anyone to go out in the pistol realm. It just doesn't make sense. Now, if you're thinking about converting it to an SBR, then I say, hey, jump into the pistol realm. And then if you have to convert it to an SBR, so be it. I get it. Yeah, so going back to the markets, AKs are up. There's low stock of AK parts, AKs in general, and ARs are back to normal. The other interesting thing was like how many guns are being sold. And so I looked up the ATF staffs for the 4473 checks, the background checks that you have to do when you do fill out a firearm. If we go back to 2019, all the months for 2022 were over 500,000, over 500,000 more for the same months in 2019. So there's still, the market is high. It's nowhere near as high as it was, but we're still much higher than we were in 2019. Granted, that's 2-ish, 3-ish years ago, but it's still much more elevated. Thankfully, though, our domestic market's been doing a pretty good job keeping up, or at least we're finally keeping up as far as production for the ARs. Not so much for the AKs. Politics again, this stuff can just go away instantly, the AKs, and then you'd be left with whatever's domestic, which pretty much means, I guess, yeah, PSA would be about it at this point. I don't think Klishnikov USA or Zastava would be able to stay in business because I believe both of them get their parts imported and assembled here in the U.S. So that could be definitely problematic. Now, there is an exception to the rule, and I know we've talked about the different points, but I wanted to make one exception for the rule. And one exception is a 5.56 AK. And you're like, Mad, that's an abomination. I will agree. But hear me out. If you really wanted an AK, and it took AR mags, or just took AK mags and shot 5.56 ammo, it wouldn't be that bad. Now, this is Yugo M90 NP. It takes AR mags. This is imported some years back. They've stopped importing this particular model, but they do have another model that uses AK mags but does do 5.56. And yeah, it's an option. If you really wanted an AK, but were concerned about all the issues, potentially a 5.56 AK could be for you. The other thing is the Polish have brought in one as well, or not one, but a couple, WBP or whatever, have brought in some 5.56 AKs, and I've heard good things. Not many complaints from, but yeah, that could be another option for you, possibly. 5.56 AK, if that's the path you really want to go down. Now, what do you want? Here's what I would tell you. If you are already in the AK world and there's an AK out there you want, and I mean you really want it, can't live without it, it might be time to suck it up, Buttercup, and buy it, because it could get really worse really quick. So I'm saying, hey, if there's something out there you really want, maybe it's time. Maybe it's time to throw $2,000 for that Sega you should have paid $299 for about 10 years ago, but that's life. So maybe it's time. Now, if you're not in the AK world, I would tell you, man, you better be really wanting it to buy an AK. Now, if you really want an AK, but you're fine accepting 5.56 or 2.23 AK, then hey, maybe one of the Yugos or one of the Polish ones are the right thing, or an option for you. It allows you to, hey, I'm in the AK world, but I don't have to deal with too many issues as far as just making sure I have mags and ammo for it, which is ammo is common for 5.56 and 2.23 here in the States, and magazines, just get you a couple to make yourself happy with. So that's one of the things you could do, the exception to the rule. But the other thing, if you're just an AR guy and you're kind of unsure, man, I'd be honest. I think jumping in the AK world for you is kind of risky at this point. Um, because if you buy something in 7.62 by 39, you don't have a lot stashed up, you want some cool mags, man, it's expensive. I mean, again, parts through the roof, magazines through the roof. It's not fun. Now, I'm not trying to sound like an old fud here. I remember the glory days of AKs, the golden age, when things were awesome and they were super cheap. I don't expect those days to ever return. I hope the market gets better, but again, I don't expect it to go back to those days. I know it won't. But it would be great to see what the new normals are. The great thing is the AR market has cooled down almost back to 2019, which is pretty solid. I'm hoping the AK market will do a little better. But again, my expectation is it won't. I think it's going to stay bad for a while with the AKs, especially until the war in Ukraine settles down, and I hope it does too soon. Anyway, I hope this video helps you guys out. If you ever have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to reach out. Happy to help. I wish you guys all the best. This is the Mad Marine signing off. Have a good one.